there. Tonight, you are not arriving at a ballroom or a roaring hearth in some cheerful winter cottage. You are arriving at a castle after dark, and the first thing you notice is not splendor. It is stone. Stone beneath your boots. Stone at your back. Stone rising in cold ribs around narrow windows that let in just enough moonlight to remind you how unfriendly the world outside has become. The floor is uneven beneath you. The mortar lines in the wall are dark with old damp. Your breath shows itself the moment you step into the chamber. A pale little ghost blooming in front of your face and then vanishing as if even it cannot bear to linger. That is the truth of it. Really. On the coldest winter nights, a medieval castle was less a dream of noble comfort and more a giant box made of rock, built to keep enemies out, and very nearly designed to keep warmth out too. If you were standing here with me, and honestly I wish you were, because misery is always improved by company, I would point to the slit of the window and the heavy wall around it and say, "There, that is the problem." The fortress is magnificent from outside. Towers, battlements, banners stiff as boards in the freezing air. But inside, where a knight must actually sleep, grandeur turns practical and then cruel. These walls defend beautifully. They also hold cold like a memory. Before we settle in, do me a small kindness. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into uncomfortable history, leave a like, subscribe, and then come back under the blankets. Tonight we are following the strange private battle behind the grand image of the medieval knight, not charging into war, but trying to keep his nose from going numb while lying in a room that could make a cellar feel sociable. Now, let the room dim a little. Unclench your jaw. Let your shoulders drop. Breathe in slowly and breathe out even more slowly. Imagine candlelight in iron holders. Imagine a draft moving the flames sideways. Imagine the smell of soot, damp wool, old straw, and a faint trace of horse carried in on boots that were never fully clean. The castle around you is not silent. It creaks. It sighs. Somewhere down the passage a servant walks, steps softened by rushes on stone. Somewhere farther off, a door closes with that deep timber sound old buildings make, a kind of wooden cough. The whole fortress is settling into night, and you are trying to do the same. The source material begins by inviting you straight into that experience, and it does so wisely, because a medieval castle in winter must be felt before it can be explained. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and sit on the edge of a rough wooden bed. The mattress beneath you gives a little, but not kindly. The chamber smells faintly of smoke and wet lime, and something almost metallic in the cold. You look toward the fire, but the fire is in another room, or far across this one, and that tells you something important immediately. Heat in castles was never democratic. It did not fill a room evenly. It gathered in a few fortunate places and abandoned the rest without apology. I have always found it strange that castles remain symbols of luxury in so many modern minds. We picture abundance, tapestries, silver cups, warm feasts, and well-padded chairs. And yes, all of that existed, at least for some. But so did frost on the inside of shutters. So did visible breath over the bed. So did men of rank sleeping in layers of wool and fur, because the chamber around them felt like the inside of a quarry after sunset. Privilege did not erase discomfort. It merely decorated it. The walls themselves are partly to blame. Thick walls sound comforting, and in summer they could be. In winter, they became cold reservoirs. Stone does not care that you are noble. Stone does not care that you have fought in tournaments, or hold land, or wear a sword with a jeweled hilt. Once the cold settles into it, it gives that cold back patiently, hour after hour, as if the whole room has decided to breathe out winter onto your skin. The torchlight trembles along the blocks, but the warmth does not travel with the light. It never really does. Light and heat in a castle chamber seem like quarreling siblings who refuse to stand near one another. You shift on the bed and hear the rustle beneath you. The sound is small, but in the chamber it carries. There is another truth. Castles at night are full of sound. Not loudness, not constant clamor, but little sounds made enormous by stone. The moan of wind through an arrow slit, the tick of a coal settling in a brazier somewhere nearby, the scratch of a rat in the wall, the flap of a loose shutter, a dog barking in the lower yard, the drip of water that has not yet frozen, but might by morning. Sleep here was never the soft modern silence of sealed windows and insulated walls. Sleep was an agreement made with disturbance. And the cold, of course, had personality. It did not rush. It crept. It moved through cracks in mortar and around the edge of a shutter and under the bottom of a curtain. It touched fingertips first, then toes, then the tip of the nose. Then, if you ignored it too long, it settled into your joints with a kind of patient malice. A knight might spend the day looking invincible under steel and leather and heraldic color, then spend the night curled like a child, trying to keep his knees warm. There is something almost comforting in that. In a strange way, history becomes more human when dignity wrinkles a little at bedtime. Some historians argue that medieval people were simply more used to the cold than we are. There is probably truth in that. Bodies adapt. Expectations harden. If your world has never offered central heating, you complain differently, and perhaps less theatrically. Then again, letters and household records still mention drafts, poor sleep, frozen drink, damp walls, and endless winter irritation. So I suspect the honest answer is not that they loved the cold. It is that they endured it because they had to, and because human beings will normalize almost anything if enough generations are born into it. Still, endurance had its limits. You can feel that as you sit there now, hands tucked into your cloak, trying to decide whether the bed is an invitation or a dare. There is a little humor in it, too. Somewhere in the castle, a lord is likely insisting that all is comfortable enough, while two servants quietly drag another pelt toward his bed, and a page checks whether the coals have gone low. Medieval dignity often depended on an astonishing amount of backstage labor. The source also hints at a lovely and faintly absurd detail. That wine might be kept near the bed, not merely for indulgence, but because anything left farther away risked freezing. I enjoy that image very much. The measure of a successful night is not that you are warm. It is that your drink has remained a liquid. A low bar, perhaps, but history is full of practical victories. It reminds us that the cold was not a poetic inconvenience. It was a daily force reorganizing everything from sleeping habits to storage. Now, if we move more slowly, and we should, because this is a sleep story and not a military campaign, you begin to understand how the room is arranged against the season. The bed is not placed directly against the outer wall, if anyone has any sense. A chest stands nearby, massive and dark, holding garments, blankets, and perhaps a few treasures. A stool waits by the bed for boots and belt and knife. A candle, guttering low, leaves a thin skin of wax over its holder. The air has that peculiar winter dryness inside the cold, mixed with dampness from stone. It is hard to explain until you imagine it. Cold and wet at once, sharp in the nostrils, but heavy in the walls. You lower yourself more fully onto the bed. The mattress gives a brittle little sigh. You try to arrange your cloak so it covers the chest, because the chest loses heat quickly. Your hands find the blanket, rough under the fingers. You pull it up. Then another. There is no single miraculous cover that solves the problem. Everything in castle sleep is cumulative. A little wool, a little fur, a curtain, a brazier, a fire in another room, another human body, sometimes a prayer, a dog at the feet, a servant remembering to bank the coals properly. Warmth was not one thing. It was a conspiracy of little things. That is the larger truth this story keeps returning to, and rightly so. How did knights sleep in medieval castles during the coldest nights? Not comfortably. That is the first answer. Not by trusting the room. That is the second. They slept by layering defenses between flesh and air until the body generated a small country of heat around itself. And by doing so, inside a world where every wall wanted to surrender them back to winter. If you listen carefully now, the castle feels less like architecture and more like an organism. The beams overhead groan in the wind. The corridors carry breath and footsteps. The stair towers funnel cold air downward and upward at once. Somewhere, a watchman coughs. Somewhere, a horse stamps. Somewhere, a pot in the kitchen contracts with a quiet pop as metal cools. It is oddly soothing once you stop resisting it. You realize that everyone inside the walls is negotiating with the same knight, though not on equal terms. The lord in a solar, the knight in his chamber, the page on a pallet, the guard on the wall, the dog by the hearth. The whole place is wrapped in the same winter skin. And perhaps that is why the castle at bedtime can feel almost tender despite everything. Because beneath the rank and ritual and severity, all these people are simply trying to stay warm enough to sleep. That goal flattens grandeur a little. It makes a famous warrior look, in the candlelight, like what he is, a tired human being with cold feet. So now the first lesson settles over you like another blanket. These walls, for all their mass, cannot save you from the season. Not fully, not by themselves. The battle must happen closer to the body, closer to the skin. It begins with the simple medieval genius of fabric layered over fabric. of linen under wool, wool under cloak, sock over hose, hood over hair, and all of it gathered around a person who hopes that if enough barriers stand between him and the freezing chamber, dawn will find him still sleepy rather than stiff. The room darkens another shade. The torch beyond the door burns lower. Your breath is still visible, but perhaps not quite as sharply now that you are under covers and beginning to settle. The castle has not grown kinder. You have simply learned the first rule of surviving it. Never trust the stone. Trust the layers you place between yourself and the stone, and be very grateful for every one of them, because the night is only just beginning, and the true work of sleep has not yet reached the mattress. It is still starting with cloth, with wool, with whatever can be wrapped, tied, tucked, or pulled close enough to let your own body become its own small hearth before the colder hours arrive. For all that, there is a peculiar peace in the chamber once you stop demanding modern comfort from it. The castle is honest with you. It does not pretend to be warm. It does not flatter the body with ease it cannot provide. Instead, it offers what it can: walls against arrows, roof against snow, a door that bars, and enough enclosed space for human skill to begin its quiet work. Perhaps that is why nights in these places can feel strangely intimate to imagine. They reduce life to simple questions. Are you dry? Are you wrapped? Is the fire alive somewhere? Have the shutters been checked? Is there enough wool? The mind narrows to essentials, and sometimes essentials are merciful. You lean back and listen again. Wind at the slit window. A faint creak from the beam above. Somewhere below, a horse stamping in the stable. The sound traveling up through stone and timber in softened little thuds. It is a reminder that the castle is never truly asleep all at once. Some creature is always moving, some ember settling, some watchman turning at his post. The cold keeps everyone in conversation with the building. That thought does not exactly warm you, but it does make you feel less alone. And loneliness is one more chill the body notices at night. And the bed, humble as it seems, begins to look almost ceremonial now. Not grand, perhaps, but purposeful. The blanket folded back, the cloak draped near at hand in case the night grows sharper. Boots positioned so they can be found at dawn without fumbling. A cup near the stool. Gloves within reach. Every object arranged not for beauty, but for surviving the interval between darkness and first light. You begin to see that medieval bedtime was full of these tiny acts of foresight. People prepared for the night because the night was not passive. It pressed back. Perhaps that is why the first minutes before lying down feel so vivid in imagination. There is hesitation. The chamber is cold enough that part of you would rather keep moving than surrender to stillness. Movement at least makes a little heat. Bed asks you to trust that covers and layers will do the rest. So you stand there a little longer than necessary, hands near the blanket, and gather your courage for the simple act of getting into a cold bed in a stone room. It sounds almost laughably small compared with the nightly life of tournaments, patrols, hunts, and war. Yet anyone who has ever stepped between icy sheets knows it is its own sort of test. When at last you lie down fully, the first sensation is not comfort. It is Contrast. The mattress feels colder where your body has not yet touched it. The air just under the blanket is cool enough to make your skin tense. For a few moments, you may even regret the whole idea of sleep. But then, the strange alchemy begins. Heat trapped. Breath softened. Blanket settled. Knees drawn up. Shoulders rounded. Human-animal ingenuity at work in the dark. The bed does not become luxurious. It becomes workable. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, workable is a miracle. So the fortress teaches its lesson without softness. Stone is splendid and merciless. Rooms are grand and hostile. Warmth is not given. It is assembled, layer by layer, habit by habit, hour by hour. You are beginning to learn that now. And as you pull the covers closer and feel your own small weather forming under them, the night ahead no longer seems impossible. Only long. And long nights, unlike impossible ones, can be survived. The first real defense begins at the skin. That sounds obvious now. Perhaps, but in a medieval castle, it was a matter of quiet life and death on the coldest nights. Once you stop expecting the room itself to help you, you start paying attention to everything wrapped around the body. Cloth becomes strategy. Fabric becomes architecture. A knight preparing for bed is no longer a figure of armor and bright heraldry. He is a layered creature, slowly building a private weather system around himself before daring to lie down. You stand by the bed and begin the small ritual. First linen, then wool, then more wool. The movements are slower now because the air punishes hesitation. The chamber is cold enough that changing clothes does not feel like undressing. It feels like a brief tactical error. The linen layer is closest to the skin, and that matters more than it might seem. It is plain, practical, easier to wash than heavier outer garments. And for all its simplicity, it performs a task the medieval household understood very well, even if not in modern technical language. It catches sweat. It keeps dampness from sinking too deeply into everything above it. It is astonishing how much of staying warm depends on staying dry, even in a room that feels frozen. If the inner layer grows wet, the whole body begins to lose the little heat it has fought to gather. So the linen shift, or shirt, lies smooth at first against cool skin, then slowly warms with you, becoming almost invisible once it has done its work. Then comes wool, and here the night becomes less elegant and more honest. Medieval wool was not the soft, polite thing many modern people imagine when they hear the word. It was denser, heavier, often rougher, and rich with the faint memory of sheep and oil. Lanolin lingered in it, giving the cloth a smell that mingled with smoke, leather, and stone. To modern noses, it might seem strong. To medieval noses, it probably smelled like safety. Honestly, there is something deeply human about that. Comfort is often just the scent we learned to associate with not freezing. You pull one wool garment over the linen, then another layer. Perhaps a tunic, perhaps a heavier outer garment, not entirely removed for sleep because the night is too cold for ceremony. Hose remain on the legs. Thick socks if the household can spare them. If not, then cloth wrapped more carefully around the feet. The feet matter terribly in winter sleep. Once they go cold, the whole body seems to lose heart. You know that feeling when your toes stay cold so long that you begin to imagine warmth is a rumor? Medieval people knew it too, and they were not romantic about it. There is a slightly comic quality to this transformation. By day, the knight may appear impressive, all line and bearing and authority. By night, with layer upon layer of cloth rising around neck and shoulders, he becomes almost round, more parcel than warrior, more bundled onion than heroic sculpture. The source transcript is very good on this point, and it should be. History becomes friendlier when it allows grand people to look a little ridiculous. There is no shame in it. Winter humbles everyone into practical shapes. The head must be protected too. Hair alone does very little once cold air starts moving through a chamber. So there is a cap, or hood, or both. Sometimes a long-tailed night hood that can be wrapped under the chin. I adore this detail. Somewhere in a castle, a man with a sword worth a village is tying a woolen hood under his jaw because his ears refuse to behave nobly in the cold. There is tenderness in that image. Greatness and absurdity share a bed more often than we admit. What fascinates me most is that this layering was not merely habit. It was accumulated knowledge. People knew, from repetition, what worked a little, what worked better, what still failed if the wind was harsh enough. The body was a lesson book. Perhaps a knight learned young as a page, shivering in a colder room than this one. That one loose cuff can invite misery all night. Perhaps a servant learned that two lighter blankets trap warmth differently from one heavy cover. Perhaps a mother wrapped children by instinct in the order her own mother had done. These are small inheritances, but vital ones. Survival is often just tradition with excellent memory. The chamber waits while you dress for sleep. The candle throws a soft, uncertain halo across the boards of a chest. The stool beside the bed holds a belt, gloves, a knife, maybe a rosary, maybe nothing more than a cup gone cold. Outside the curtain, if there is one, the room remains hostile, but at the center of your own person something has changed. The cold no longer touches skin directly. It must argue with cloth first, then another cloth, then another, and that delay matters. It gives the body time to build heat instead of spending all its effort replacing what the air steals immediately. You lower yourself to sit again and feel the layers settle with you. Wool has a weight to it. Not crushing, but definite. Like a hand resting to reassure you. It scratches a little at the neck. The knees feel bulky when bent. The sleeves drag more heavily over the wrists than linen would. Yet these small annoyances soon become comforts. The body begins to read pressure as protection. You curl slightly inward, and warmth, faint at first, begins to gather in the pockets between fabric and skin. This is one of the quiet miracles of pre-modern life. Really. Human beings can turn humble material into a shelter small enough to wear. The source also makes a lovely point about smell, and we should linger there, because scent is one of the fastest ways into a sleeping mind. The wool smells earthy, oily, faintly animal. The linen smells cleaner, though never sterile in the modern sense. Over everything lies smoke from hearth or candle, old timber, rushes underfoot, maybe a trace of rosemary or lavender, if the household believes in such softening gestures. Medieval sleep happened inside a blend of odors many modern people would find overwhelming. But to those living within it, those smells may have been as reassuring as lullabies. They meant the room was prepared. The bed was near. The body had a chance. There is debate, of course, about how many layers were typical. Inventories mention linens and blankets, but not always with the precision one might wish for. Some historians think even lesser knights had decent access to wool and multiple covers because a fighting man was an investment not worth losing to stupidity. Others are less generous, suggesting many slept in whatever they had worn during the day, plus a blanket or two if fortune held. Both possibilities feel plausible. Medieval life was never uniform. A rich household in one region could make another of similar rank look almost poor in winter provisions. So perhaps tonight you are lucky. Perhaps there are enough layers. Or perhaps you are doing what people have always done when supplies fall short. Pulling what cloth there is more tightly around yourself and pretending confidence will help. You lie back slowly. The pillow gives beneath your head with a faint crunch or sigh depending on what it is stuffed with. Already the linen near your chest is warming. The wool above it is beginning to trap that heat and keep it from lifting away too quickly. Your legs feel less exposed. Your shoulders, though still aware of the cold air around the bed, begin to soften. The body is no fool. It recognizes incremental victory. And this is where the emotional part enters. Not just the practical, but the intimate. Because layers do more than warm. They reassure. Each one says, not enough perhaps, but something, another barrier, another chance, another hour borrowed from the night. There is a reason children and the old alike have always liked being tucked in. A tucked body feels defended. Medieval adults, however martial, were no different. The cold does not care about your reputation. The blanket does not care either. It simply does its duty if enough of it lies between you and the dark. You may smile now, imagining a proud knight disappearing beneath all this fabric, his silhouette transformed from heroic profile to lumpy mound. Good. You should smile. Sleep history deserves humor. Too often we picture the past only in stiff poses and serious paintings. But real people complained, fussed, scratched at rough seams, adjusted socks, cursed the draft, and burrowed into wool like anyone else. The ordinary intimacy of bedtime is one of the best ways to rescue them from legend. The room remains cold. Certainly. The walls have not relented. A thread of air still sneaks from somewhere it has no business entering. But your fingers, once stinging, are less sharp with discomfort now. Your knees tucked up under blanket and wool begin to feel like your own again. Even your breathing changes. At first, each inhale was a reminder of the room. Now the air close to your face grows a little softer because cloth and cover trap some of your warmth around you. Tiny changes. But this whole battle is built on tiny changes. There is also dignity in this. A different sort than the public kind. Not the dignity of armor or banners or courtly speech. The dignity of knowing how to take care of your own body in a harsh world. Knowing where to put the warmest layer. knowing the ears must be covered, knowing that bare skin against cold sheet is foolish, knowing that no amount of masculine pride will save your feet if you leave them uncovered. Medieval people may not have theorized all of this in modern language, but they knew it in their bones. The body teaches quickly when winter is the instructor. Outside the chamber, perhaps a servant passes with another armful of cloth for some higher room. Perhaps two guards mutter about the cold below a stair. Perhaps somewhere a lord calls for a warmer cap while pretending not to have minded the first one. It happens. It must have happened often. The castle at night was full of these little negotiations with temperature, each rank and room solving them differently, but all under the same moon and same pressure of season. As you settle further, the roughness of the wool becomes less an irritation and more a texture of safety. Your cheek brushes blanket. Your chin tucks lower. The hood, if you wear one, shifts slightly when you turn your head. It might look absurd to an observer, but observers do not matter here. Only warmth matters. Only sleep. Only making it to dawn without waking every few moments to rescue a hand or foot from the cold. That phrase matters too. Making it to dawn. Medieval winter sleep was often less about luxurious rest than about lasting through the hours in tolerable condition. That sounds grim, and perhaps it is, but there is also something admirable in the sheer practicality of it. People crafted comfort from stubbornness and cloth. They built little fortresses of wool around themselves inside larger fortresses of stone, because the big fortress could not do enough. You can feel now why the next question in the story must move to the bed itself. Once the body is layered and hooded and wrapped, what it lies upon begins to matter with painful force. Cloth can save you from the air above and around, but not from the cold creeping upward through a poor mattress. The body has warmed its own layers. Good. Now, it must negotiate with straw, or feather, or whatever lies beneath, because sleep in a castle was always a stack of small defenses, and you have only just completed the first and most personal of them. The rest of the night is waiting under your back. There is also the matter of what gets left beside the bed once all these layers are in place. Gloves drying from the day. A belt coiled neatly. Boots angled toward the little warmth in the room if there is any. Sometimes a knife. Sometimes a prayer book. Sometimes nothing but a cup and the hope of morning. These details matter because they remind you that a medieval night was never fully detached from the day that came before or the day that would follow. A man slept in preparation as much as in recovery. His clothing, his hose, his cap, even the order in which he removed things carried tomorrow inside them. And because tomorrow mattered, sleep clothing was not always entirely separate from ordinary clothing. This is another point that modern minds sometimes miss. The idea of dedicated soft sleepwear for all is too neat, too comfortable. Many people went to bed in what they already had, perhaps loosened, perhaps partly changed, perhaps supplemented with extra layers. The chamber was too cold for purity of custom. Practicality ruled. If a second wool tunic made the difference between shivering and resting, then into bed it went, whatever a more elegant ritual might have preferred. You begin to understand why historians hesitate when asked simple questions like how many layers a knight wore to bed. The truth likely changed not just by century or country, but by household, by room. By weather, by the condition of a man's purse, by whether the firewood had run low that week, by whether he had returned wet from patrol, by whether his servant had done the drying properly. History is often less a clean answer than a pile of plausible evenings. This evening, in this chamber, you have enough. Enough linen, enough wool, enough cover, enough luck. The body recognizes luck very quickly. The sharp ache in your toes eases. Your fingers uncurl from their earlier tension. The muscles between shoulder and neck begin to let go a little once they stop bracing against every brush of air. That is one of the forgotten luxuries of warmth, even partial warmth. It teaches the body that it may release its guard. In a castle, on a freezing night, that release had to be earned by cloth and patience. So you wait inside your layers and let the minutes do their work. A little more warmth gathers at the chest, a little around the thighs, a little at the small of the back where blanket and mattress and wool finally agree to cooperate. Outside your cocoon, the room is still a hard place. Inside it, you are beginning to become drowsy. Not comfortable, perhaps, but defended. And that is enough to carry you toward the next element in the long art of castle sleep. The thing beneath the blankets and beneath your weight, where straw and feather and rank all declare themselves very clearly indeed. You have done what you can with cloth. Linen near the skin, wool over that, another fold of wool where the cold seems sharpest, hood over hair, socks pulled higher than dignity might prefer. Now, your body turns its attention downward, because the truth presses up from below just as surely as the draft presses in from the wall. What lies under you matters almost as much as what covers you. In a winter castle chamber, a bad mattress is not merely an annoyance. It is a silent accomplice to the cold. You shift your weight and listen. The bed answers with a sound of its own, a dry little rustle, then a deeper settling sigh. Already you can tell something about its filling. Medieval people would have known the difference at once. Not by theory, but by back, hip, shoulder, and nose. Straw spoke one language, feathers another. A poor bed scratched and crackled and reminded you, all night, that comfort was conditional. A rich one yielded and breathed around the body and made a man believe, for a few blessed minutes, that winter might be negotiated with instead of merely endured. The simplest mattress was little more than a sack filled with straw, dried rushes, or some mixture of cheap vegetal stuffing that could be gathered, dried, packed, and replaced without too much ceremony. There is a blunt honesty to straw. It smells like the field or the stable, depending on how fresh it is and how carefully it was stored. It pricks through fabric in places. It shifts into ridges. It flattens where the body lies longest. It rustles with every turn, and in a stone room full of echoes, that rustle becomes a kind of commentary on your failure to get comfortable. If you were here with me, I would invite you to put a hand on the mattress first, before lying down. You would feel firmness. Yes, but not even firmness. Unevenness. Little humps and hollows. A place where the straw has settled thin. Another where it has gathered too thickly. Then you lower yourself and the whole thing moves under you with a dry shiver. The smell rises at once, not entirely unpleasant, but unmistakable. High Dust. The shadow of a barn carried up into a room with carved wood and stone walls. There is something almost funny about that. You may live in a castle, but you still go to sleep on agriculture. A hard man, or one who wished to sound like a hard man, might claim to prefer such a bed. Better for the back, perhaps. Better for discipline. Better for courage. Medieval people were no strangers to bragging about discomfort after it had already happened. Yet I suspect that when the chamber was truly cold and the patrol had been long and the joints ached from riding or training, even the proudest knight could look at a feather bed with very unmilitary affection. Because the feather bed was another world. The source material is right to emphasize this. Feather mattresses were prized, named in wills, hauled on journeys, protected from damp, fussed over by servants, and spoken of with the same seriousness people often reserve for land or silver. Once you have felt the difference, it is not hard to understand why. A feather bed receives the body instead of arguing with it. It sinks, but not too quickly. It softens the sharp insistence of wood beneath. It traps warmth better than straw because it holds little pockets of air close around the sleeper. It is not magic. Nothing in this story is magic. But it is close enough to luxury that people noticed. Imagine lowering yourself onto such a mattress after a day in winter air. The bed gives, slowly and generously, as if it has been waiting with some patience for your weight to arrive. Feathers shift under the ticking fabric with a hush instead of a crackle. Your shoulder settles rather than perches. The hip is cushioned. The cold does not vanish, but it no longer thrusts so directly upward into bone. That alone would have felt miraculous. And yet even here, history refuses to become too tidy. Feather beds had their own small betrayals. Quills worked loose. Stitching failed. A sleeper might turn and feel the sharp little jab of a stubborn feather poking through. I enjoy that detail very much. It keeps luxury honest. Somewhere in the dark, a lord lies on imported softness and suddenly yelps because a goose has reached up from the mattress to remind him that privilege is still made of very practical things. There is debate, of course, about how broadly such bedding was available. Some scholars think feather mattresses were mostly for the upper nobility, the truly wealthy households whose inventories read like small kingdoms in fabric and wood. Others point to records showing feather beds among the belongings of lesser households too. Not common, perhaps, but not unimaginably rare. I think the fairest answer is the old historian's answer. It depends. On wealth, on region, on inheritance, on whether the bed belonged to the house or to the man, on how many people competed for the best sleeping arrangements inside the same walls. That uncertainty is useful for us tonight, because it lets the imagination hold both realities at once. Perhaps you are lucky. Perhaps the bed under you is down-filled, a little flattened from use but still deeply softer than straw. Or perhaps you are not. Perhaps the straw crackles every time you breathe too deeply, and a stalk somewhere under the ticking seems determined to introduce itself to your ribs before dawn. Both happened. Both were medieval. Both existed under the same roof in different rooms. The mattress also carried meaning beyond comfort. That is one of the loveliest and saddest truths about domestic history. Beds were not merely where people slept. They were status, inheritance, display, intimacy, illness, birth, death, and recovery all bundled together in wood and stuffing. A feather mattress on a carved frame announced that the person sleeping there mattered. A straw pallet on the floor announced that someone mattered less. No herald had to say a word. Bedding spoke fluently. You can feel that hierarchy now if you listen to the chamber around you. The bed stands raised from the floor rather than lying directly on the rushes. Or perhaps it does not. Perhaps the frame is stout and carved. Or perhaps it is little more than boards on trestles. Perhaps there is a canopy. Or perhaps there is only the wall and the blanket and your own body heat trying to make up the difference. Medieval architecture and medieval furniture were always in conversation with rank. Who slept highest, softest, nearest the fire, farthest from the outer wall? These were not little matters. In winter, they could mean the difference between tolerable rest and hours of muttered resentment. I have always found it endearing that some wealthy travelers hauled bedding with them rather than trusting what awaited at the next stop. Imagine the procession. Horses, chests, servants, arms, clothing, and among all that pomp, a great rolled mattress, because my lord does not believe other people's beds should be allowed to touch his back. It sounds comic, and it is comic, but it is also perfectly sensible if one has ever spent a freezing night on a bad surface. Pride and comfort often travel in the same wagon. Now you lie still long enough for the mattress to declare itself fully. If it is straw, you begin the slow work of negotiation. A shoulder shifts. A knee pulls up. A hand reaches beneath the blanket to tug the ticking slightly flatter where the filling has bulged. Sleep in such a bed is never an immediate surrender. It is a treaty reached after many adjustments. The body tries one arrangement, rejects it, tries another, learns where the lumps can be forgiven, decides which discomfort is smallest. There is a tenderness in that process too. The body is so patient with the world when it has no better options. If it is a feather bed, the negotiation is gentler but still present. Feather mattresses can sag unevenly. They can hold heat beautifully once warmed, yet feel shockingly cold at first contact. They can also swallow a person just enough to make turning over awkward under many blankets. Again, history refuses us a perfect luxury. Every comfort has its little tax. The source also mentions another important layer: mats or rush coverings beneath the mattress itself, meant to keep damp from rising from the floor or frame. That small detail is easy to miss, but it shows how medieval sleep was an art of stacking. Very little stood alone. Mattress on mat, sheet over mattress, blanket over sheet, pelt over blanket, curtain around bed, fire near bed. A whole civilization improvising insulation by accumulation. You can almost feel that stack now as you sink deeper. Under your body, the mattress. Under that, perhaps a woven layer. Under that wood. Under that cold air moving near the floor. Under that stone. The fortress remains there, huge and indifferent. But all these human additions intervene between you and its worst intentions. They say, not today, not yet. What I enjoy most about this part of the story is how it quietly turns the night from a symbol into a sleeper. We are no longer watching a man on horseback or under arms. We are watching him test a mattress with his hip and decide, with entirely ordinary disappointment, that one side is worse than the other. This is the intimacy history deserves. Great figures should be allowed to rustle. Outside the chamber, winter keeps doing what winter does. Wind searches the shutters. Ice thickens around a bucket in some forgotten corner. Somewhere in the stable, a horse exhales steam into the dark. Somewhere a servant rolls shoulders that ache from hauling bedding. The whole castle feels arranged against the season, and the bed is the place where that arrangement becomes personal. Here, the difference between wealth and plain endurance is measured not in abstract numbers, but in whether your back can soften enough for sleep to take hold. There is also an emotional difference between straw and feather that is worth lingering over. Straw says, "This will do." Feather says, "Rest if you can." Straw belongs to necessity. Feather belongs to hope. I do not mean hope in a grand spiritual sense, though perhaps that is never entirely absent at bedtime. I mean the simple, hopeful thought that tonight might not hurt too much, that one might not wake every hour rearranging your own bones against the cold. Perhaps that is why feather beds were listed in wills. They were comfort made tangible. They represented not only status, but a particular kind of mercy. Still, even the finest mattress could not win the war alone. It could soften the wood. It could hold some warmth. It could cradle rather than scratch. But above it, around it, and pressing through every tiny gap in the room, winter remained at work. Which is why the next line of defense had to come from something heavier, older, and closer to the wilderness itself. Fur, animal skins, pelts with the smell of forest and tannin, laid over the body like the memory of the hunt returned in service of sleep. You shift once more, testing the bed's final answer. Perhaps the straw at last lies still under your weight. Perhaps the feathers have cupped you into a tolerable hollow. Either way, you are more settled now than you were minutes ago. The body has found its place, or the least objectionable version of it. The mattress has ceased to be a problem that needs solving, and become instead part of the night's uneasy alliance. And that matters. Once the body stops wrestling what lies beneath it, it can begin to notice what might save it from above. Already the blanket across your chest feels a little lighter than before, because you know more weight is coming. Not armor, not burden in the waking sense. The good burden of warmth. The deep pressure of hide and fur and thick animal insulation that medieval people trusted because nature had designed it first for survival. The bed has given what it can. Now the wild will be invited in. Skinned, tanned, trimmed, and laid over you until the night in the castle begins to resemble, in the best possible way, a creature making a winter den inside the stone body of the fortress. The weight arrives all at once. A servant lifts it, perhaps, or perhaps you drag it over yourself with both hands, depending on rank and circumstance. Either way, the moment is unmistakable. The pelt settles over blanket and wool with a dense, living heaviness that woven cloth alone cannot imitate. At once the body understands something important. This is not decoration. This is insulation. The room may still be cold, The walls may still hold night in their stone jaws. But now another layer has entered the battle, and it came first from an animal that knew better than any human tailor how to survive winter. The source makes a fine point of this, and it is worth dwelling on. Pelts were not merely rustic extras or hunting trophies draped theatrically around rooms. They were some of the most practical and prized defenses against cold available to a medieval household. Deer, bear, wolf, boar. Sometimes softer furs, if wealth and region allowed. Thick hides and winter coats brought indoors, tanned, trimmed, shaken out, and then laid across a bed where their work continued in another form. The hunt ended months ago, perhaps, but the animal still keeps someone warm. There is something a little eerie in that, and also very soothing. Medieval life often found comfort in arrangements we might call unsettling. Tonight you lie under the skin of something that once ran through dark woods, not unlike the ones beyond the castle walls. Outside, wolves cry. Inside, wolf fur lies over your chest. The line between fortress and forest becomes thinner than you expected. If you were here with me now, I would ask you to touch the pelt before pulling it fully over. The outside guard hairs are coarser, almost wiry in places. The inner fur or undercoat is softer, densa, better at holding still air. The smell is stronger than cloth. Not filthy, not raw, but unmistakably animal. Tanning oil, leather, a musky earth note, something of smoke from the room and something of old rain from the memory of the hide itself. To modern tastes, it might seem intrusive. To medieval sleepers, it likely smelled like one more promise that the night might be survivable. And then the weight. That is the great difference. A wool blanket warms by covering. A pelt warms by covering and pressing. It lies on you like an agreement signed in gravity. The chest rises under it, and must work a little more to lift it. The shoulders feel held down. The knees under the blanket remain tucked because the weight discourages fidgeting. It is almost like being anchored into warmth. I think that is one reason people loved it. Not just the heat trapped, but the sensation of being pinned gently inside your own small climate. There was prestige in these skins, too. Naturally, medieval people had a real talent for making practical things symbolic, and symbolic things practical. A bearskin did not merely warm. It said power, danger, hunt, dominance. A wolf pelt carried its own little mythology of the wild made obedient. Deer hide suggested noble hunting privilege. The forest rendered into civilized utility. Even in bed, status never stopped speaking. You could brag while asleep if your blankets were expensive enough. That makes me smile, because it is so relentlessly human. The weather is trying to freeze your face, and still someone finds a way to make the bedding into a social statement. There are records of noble beds layered with multiple pelts, sometimes embroidered at the edges, sometimes combined with rich textiles in a way that must have looked magnificent by candlelight. Yet beneath the display was a very simple truth. Fur works. It traps heat with a stubborn competence that cloth struggles to match. A man returning from patrol or drill with cold sunk into his limbs might crawl under those skins and feel life returning slowly, not in one dramatic rush, but in a gradual inward thaw. Fingers first, then calves, Then the deep ache across the back, easing by degrees, like damp wood finally beginning to catch. Some historians think pelts were widespread enough that even modest households possessed a few. Others caution that written sources overrepresent the elite, as written sources often do, and that poorer retainers likely relied more heavily on ordinary wool. I think again the safest answer is variety. Some had abundance. Some had one treasured skin used for travel and sleep alike. Some had only cloth. But enough evidence survives to make one thing clear. Animal skins were not a fantasy of romance. They were part of the real nightly toolkit against winter. Portability mattered too. A feather mattress could not easily accompany a man beyond the walls. A pelt could. It could serve as cloak on the road, bedding in a campaign camp, cover in a guest room, and extra warmth on the home bed afterward. The same skin might know open field, horse saddle, wagon, chest, and castle chamber all within a season. That flexibility gave it a practical nobility all its own. It was one of the few luxuries, if luxury it was, that could travel at the pace of a nightly life. You pull the pelt higher, the smell is stronger near the face, then fades as the senses accept it. Weight becomes comfort. The body stops objecting. That is another little medieval lesson. Many things are tolerable once they have had a few minutes to become familiar. Cold is terrible because it keeps announcing itself. Warmth, once gathered, asks less attention. There is also a psychological comfort in fur that woven blankets do not fully reproduce. Fur belongs to living things. It curves and lies differently. It feels less made and more grown. In a harsh season, that can matter. A pelt over the body is a reminder that winter survival is not uniquely human. Animals solved this long before castles did. The night under fur is borrowing an older knowledge. The bed itself begins to change character now. With mattress below and pelt above, it no longer feels like furniture. It feels like a den. That image appears in the source too, and it is exactly right. Draw the bed curtain partly in, pull the fur to the chin, hunch shoulders a little, and suddenly the chamber outside grows remote. The castle remains large and drafty and difficult, but the space immediately around the body shrinks into something burrowed and animal. Medieval comfort often worked by reducing scale. If you cannot heat the room, heat the bed. If you cannot heat the bed, heat the body. If you cannot win against winter, outwit it by becoming smaller and more enclosed than winter expected. And still, despite all this, the edges remain vulnerable. A draft finds the cheek. A little cold spot lingers near the shoulder where the pelt slipped a finger's width aside. The nose threatens to chill. No one ever conquered these nights completely. That is important. The beauty of the story lies not in total victory, but in the patient stubbornness of partial victories. A warmer chest, less aching feet. Sleep that comes in stretches instead of only in exhausted collapses. There is a kind of honesty in that which I admire very much. The pelt also changes the acoustics of the bed. Sounds soften under heavy fur. Your own movements become more muffled. The blanket no longer whispers against itself so sharply. Even breathing sounds lower, as if the den has accepted you and is now asking for less disturbance. Outside, the chamber still knows wind and shutter and timber groan. Inside, under hide and cloth, the body hears more of itself. Heartbeat, breath, the faint little clicks of cooling joints finally relaxing. This would be a good time, in the room, for the firelight to matter again. Not because it has suddenly grown powerful, but because fur and fire make each other feel more complete. Across the chamber the hearth glows, or if no hearth is near enough, then perhaps a brazier throws a smaller orange pulse. Light trembles on the wall. A little shine catches on the nap of the pelt. Shadows thicken between bed and chest and stool. The room is still mostly winter, but the bed has become another season, if only just. And so we must talk about fire more directly now, because no matter how excellent the fur, no medieval sleeper trusted bedding alone. Somewhere in or near the chamber, there had to be flame, coals, embers, some managed source of heat, however imperfect. The fireplace in a castle room was a remarkable thing in theory, and often a disappointment in practice. One side of the body warmed. The other remained cold. The chimney drew heat greedily upward. The room beyond the immediate zone of glow stayed difficult. Yet people returned to fire again and again because imperfect heat still outranks none at all. Imagine the hearth now, not roaring extravagantly, because wood is labor and cost, and someone must tend it. Instead, a measured fire. Logs shifted inward. Coals bright beneath ash. A small crackle. A brief sigh when resin catches. The smell of wood smoke enters the room and folds itself into everything else. Into wool. Into pelt. Into hair. Into the curtain around the bed. Medieval sleep smelled of burning because so much survival did. You sit up a little, perhaps, or turn enough to see the flames. The warmth reaches your face more than your feet. This is one of those comical truths the source handles nicely. Castle heat was often lopsided. You could feel nearly pleasant on one side of the body and abandoned on the other. Half in summer, half in January. A situation both absurd and entirely normal. Households tried tricks. Firebacks of metal to throw heat outward. Screens. Angled stone. Better placed beds. None of it solved the main problem. The chamber was too large. The walls too cold. The openings too drafty. But cleverness still matters even when it falls short. Human beings do not stop trying merely because perfection is unavailable. They build reflectors. They move furniture. They ask a servant to bring the coals closer. They drag the bed one little degree nearer the hearth and hope not to scorch the curtain. That last detail makes me laugh every time. Better a singed drape than a frozen nose. Medieval aristocratic decision-making could be wonderfully direct at bedtime. And then there is the brazier, the smaller hearth that comes to the bedside instead of demanding the sleeper come to it. A bowl of glowing coals, iron or bronze, carried carefully, set down with caution, watched with just enough anxiety to keep everyone honest. There is something intimate about a brazier. A fireplace belongs to the room. A brazier belongs to the body nearest it. It is targeted mercy. The source is excellent on the risks here. Smoke. View miss scattered coals. The possibility that warmth, badly managed, might become another enemy. This too feels profoundly medieval. Every solution has a hazard attached to it. You can warm the bed, yes, but perhaps at the cost of breath. You can place the coals close, yes, but perhaps at the cost of the rushes if they catch. Survival in these places was not comfort without danger. It was choosing which danger felt more negotiable tonight. Still, the glow of a brazier near the bed must have been irresistible. Imagine it now. Low orange light pulsing under the edge of the curtain. A little breath of warmth near the hands. Fingers held out just enough to feel life return. Perhaps before getting in, a warming pan or bed warmer was run between sheets, taking the first cruelty out of the fabric. A medieval electric blanket, if one is willing to ignore every possible safety concern, which the Middle Ages often did until forced not to. You sink deeper now beneath pelt and blanket, and the chamber begins to divide into zones. Near the fire, possibility. Near the bed, tolerable warmth. Beyond that, the cold republic of stone. It is enough to quiet the body, enough to let sleep approach rather than hover at a nervous distance. The beauty of this moment is that all the elements begin cooperating. The mattress no longer argues. The pelt presses warmth downward. The fire offers a little heat outward. The body in between slowly stops bracing. This is not ease in the modern sense. It is more honorable than ease. It is relief earned by many materials, many hands, many adjustments. Soon the bed curtain will matter more. Soon the room will shrink further, and the outside of the chamber will become almost theoretical. Soon servants and hidden labor will enter the story more clearly, because no one maintained this warmth alone. But for now, at this stage of the night, it is enough to feel the old alliance of mattress, pelt, and flame holding winter back by inches. You close your eyes a little more fully. On the other side of the lids, the fire leaves reddish patterns. The fur at your chin smells faintly wild and faintly smoky. Somewhere in the room, a coal settles with a soft tick. The chamber is still a fortress, still drafty, still not to be trusted. Yet the bed has become a second fortress within it, made of hide, heat, and patient human cunning. And inside that smaller stronghold, with the weight of the pelt across you and the glow of coals somewhere near, you begin to understand how a medieval night was endured. Not by defeating the cold in one grand gesture, but by layering one old animal wisdom over one human invention after another, until the body finally believes it may close its eyes. The bed is warmer now than the chamber, but the chamber has not surrendered. You feel that the moment your hand slips outside the covers and the air touches your knuckles like cold water. It is enough to remind you that warmth inside a castle was rarely a matter of heating the whole room. It was a matter of making a smaller room inside the larger one. A room of cloth, fur, breath, and patience. This is where the bed curtains begin to matter. From outside, a curtained bed could look theatrical, almost proud. Posts carved or plain, a canopy above, thick hangings falling around the sides like the walls of a tiny pavilion. Modern eyes sometimes read that as decoration first, privacy second. and warmth somewhere after. Medieval sleepers likely understood the order differently on cold nights. First, warmth. Then shelter from drafts. Then privacy if one was fortunate enough to claim it. The curtains were not merely elegant fabric hanging around a piece of furniture. They were a defense line. If you were standing beside the bed with me, I would ask you to notice the sound before anything else. A chamber without curtains lets every whisper of wind roam where it likes. A chamber with bed curtains creates a muffled center. The world outside the cloth remains restless, but inside there is a hush, or something close to it. You pull the curtain inward, and the room changes at once, not because it becomes truly warm, not yet, but because the air immediately around your body stops moving so freely. That alone is a kind of mercy. The source material describes these curtains well, as heavy, practical, and more important than they first appear. Inventories from the later Middle Ages list them with care. Wool, linen, sometimes velvet or richer fabrics for those who could afford display, even in their sleep. Whatever the material, the idea was simple. Build a tent within the chamber. Keep your own warmth close. Keep the draft at one more remove. If the castle insists on behaving like an ice cellar, then make yourself a smaller castle inside it. There is something deeply comforting about that instinct. Human beings, when the world grows too large and too cold, try to shrink it into something manageable. A bed curtain is an argument against scale. No, you say to the chamber, I will not sleep in all of you. I will sleep in this little pocket only. And that will have to do. You draw the curtain further and feel the difference immediately around your face. Your breath no longer disappears into the whole room. It lingers. It warms the small enclosure by degrees. The pelt over your chest seems heavier because the air beneath it is less disturbed. Even the mattress begins to feel more cooperative now that the cold is not constantly refreshed by every wandering draft. It is still winter outside the curtain. Inside, something closer to truce begins. Of course, there were inconveniences. There always were. Too tightly drawn, the bed curtains trapped breath and made the space feel stuffy. Too loosely tied, they surrendered their purpose and let the draft explore your ankles. A sleeper might wake in the night to pull one side closer, then later crack it open again for air, then regret that choice as soon as the cold found the opening. Medieval comfort was often a matter of tiny adjustments, repeated until the body stopped complaining loudly enough for sleep to hear itself think. I have always liked the image of a mighty knight fussing with his bed curtains in the dark. Not because it lowers him, exactly, but because it reveals how universal bedtime is. Great men, stern men, dangerous men, they all become negotiators with fabric after midnight, somewhere under a banner and family crest. Someone is muttering at a draft, like any ordinary mortal. The curtains changed sound as well as temperature. The fire beyond them still cracks. A dog may still bark somewhere in the lower hall. The wind still threads the arrow slit. But these noises are softened, pushed back a little, wrapped in cloth. The bed becomes a chamber inside the chamber, and in that smaller place, the body has a better chance of forgetting its vigilance. That forgetting is precious. Sleep needs it. The source also points out something else the curtains offered: and that is privacy, or at least the medieval version of it. Castle life was crowded. Even noble households moved with attendants. Pages, squires, ladies-in-waiting, servants who entered and exited rooms with a frequency that would startle most modern people. To draw the bed curtains was to create a boundary that could not be perfectly enforced, but could at least be signaled. Here, for a few hours, is the person and their breathing and their dreams. Here is a little darkness that belongs to one sleeper, or to two, if the night and the household require it. That privacy matters emotionally. It helps the body unclench. It lets a person feel held rather than exposed. Even now, imagining it, you can sense the relief. The room beyond may remain huge, cold, and only partly tamed by the fire. But the small fabric world around the bed feels answerable to you. You can reach and draw it. You can tuck it. You can open one side or close another. This is control at a scale a freezing person can use. There is labor hidden in these curtains too. The source is very good on that point, and it should be. Comfort in a castle did not rise naturally out of stone. Someone had to shake the hangings free of soot. Someone had to mend the torn edge where moth or spark had done its damage. Someone had to tie them back in the morning and draw them closed at night. If they were lined with fur or heavy cloth, they carried not just warmth, but work. Repeated work. Quiet work. Mostly unpraised work. This is where the servants begin to step more clearly into the story, and they deserve it. A knight might be remembered in song for battle. A lord might be painted near his bed in all the symbols of rank. But neither one slept warmly by rank alone. They slept because hands moved through the room before they arrived, preparing against the night with a competence that was almost liturgical in its repetition. Picture the chamber in the hour before sleep. Servants entering with rushes, with blankets folded over their arms, with tongs for the coals, with a warming pan or brazier, with small practiced movements that leave no room for clumsiness, because clumsiness has consequences in winter. One smooths the bed. Another checks the curtain ties. Another adds a pelt. Another nudges a chest away from the dampest place near the wall. The whole room is adjusted toward survivability, and the person who will sleep in it may never think consciously of half those adjustments once they are lying down. There is something humbling in that, and something beautiful too. Rest is often a communal achievement, disguised as an individual one. The source mentions warming pans, and it is worth lingering there because the image is so vivid. A metal pan filled with embers passed over the sheets or under the upper cover before the sleeper climbs in. Not enough to scorch, if the page or servant knows what he is doing. Just enough to steal the first cruelty from the bed. Imagine the concentration required. A young page, cheeks pink from the fire and from anxiety, gripping the handle carefully, praying he will not burn a hole through his lord's bedding and ruin his own week, or month, or life, depending on the temperament of the household. Then the pan is removed and the warmth remains for a little while, a little secret held in the sheets. A small deception practiced on winter. The bed seems kinder than it is because someone has gone ahead of you with fire. Rushes on the floor matter here too. Fresh or fresher rushes spread over stone to soften footsteps, dull dampness, and sweeten the air if herbs are mixed in with them. Lavender, perhaps, or rosemary, or mint, if the household has stores and preference for such things. The smell in the room then becomes a blend: smoke and wool and pelt and stone, but also green life, bruised underfoot. A meadow brought indoors and asked to help with winter. That detail always pleases me. Even in cold fortresses, people wanted the room to smell alive. You lie back and sense all these invisible preparations holding you. The curtain close, the bedding smoothed, the pelt laid straight, the warmth preloaded into the sheets by someone else's labor. The herbs underfoot or near the pillow doing what they can to sweeten a hard place. Medieval sleep could be harsh, yes, but it was rarely accidental. It was assembled, sometimes meticulously, and not every assembly was perfect. Records mention mistakes, forgotten embers, damp blankets, rooms not properly strewed. Masters irritated at discomfort they did not fully understand, had required effort to lessen in the first place. That too feels painfully familiar across the centuries. People notice failures in comfort more readily than the labor that prevented larger failures. A properly warmed chamber disappears into the experience of sleep. A poorly warmed chamber becomes a grievance by dawn. Still, when the work is done well, the result is almost magical in a small domestic way. You enter a room hostile by nature and find a bed that has been transformed into something nearly welcoming. Not by wealth alone, though wealth helps. Not by architecture alone, though architecture matters. By routine, by preparation, by the steady intelligence of people who know what this season does to an unprepared body. It is easy to picture knights as self-sufficient. Men who rode, fought, hunted, judged, commanded. But night has a way of revealing dependence with unusual honesty. A man can be brave in battle and still rely on another to warm his bed, bank his fire, lay his rushes, close his curtains, and make possible the vulnerability of sleep. That dependence does not diminish him. It simply makes the whole household visible. The body responds to visible and invisible care alike. Inside the bed curtains, under the weighted pelt, over the mattress that is no longer your enemy, you begin to feel not merely warm enough, but looked after. That emotional shift matters. Sleep is easier when the body believes someone has prepared the world against it, even if only a little. You can hear the servants leaving now in imagination. The softer steps, the tiny clink of tongs, the last curtain tie adjusted. A murmur, perhaps, a whispered blessing, or just a practical note about the fire. Then the chamber stills. Their labor remains after they go, all around you, and the bed becomes not simply a nest of fabric, but a carefully arranged answer to the season. Yet one answer was often not enough. Warmth could be built by bedding and enclosed by curtains. Yes, it could be encouraged by fire and maintained by service. But on the coldest nights, another old, simple defense remained, one more human than architectural. Another body close by, another sleeper under the same cover, another source of heat. The castle did not always offer solitude, and in winter solitude was not always a gift. Very often, it was just another way to get cold. There is another emotional comfort in curtains that the practical descriptions only hint at. They make the bed feel chosen. In a large room full of furniture, chests, stools, wall hangings, and cold corners, the curtain tells the body exactly where to be. Here, this is the pocket where you may stop scanning the room. This is the place where your feet belong, where your hands may unclench, where your eyes may close without feeling foolish. I think that matters more than we often admit. Sleep is easier when space narrows around it and says, yes, you may disappear for a while. And the visual change is just as important. Candlelight outside the curtain flickers and throws larger, colder shadows against stone. Inside the curtain, the light softens. It comes through fabric dimly, almost like moonlight through cloud. That softening can trick the body into calm. The room beyond is still full of hard edges, but from the bed they blur. A chest becomes a shape. A stool becomes a darker block near the floor. The world loses some of its sharpness, and when sharpness retreats, sleep advances. We should also remember that bed curtains were not always only side hangings. Some enclosed the bed almost entirely, top and all, turning it into something closer to a box of fabric and wood. A person stepping into such a bed was not merely lying down. They were entering. That language feels right to me. Entering warmth. Entering enclosure. Entering a small domestic cave made by carpenters and textile workers and maintained by servants whose names are mostly lost. One can almost imagine the body relaxing in anticipation before it even lies flat, simply because the curtain has closed and the room has receded. Then there is the morning side of all this, which says much about the night. Curtains held soot. They held smell. They held the memory of breath and smoke and herbs and winter air from a dozen previous evenings. They needed shaking, brushing, beating out. Insects found them. Mice perhaps found the edges of them. Fabric in a castle was never static. It lived a busy life. That constant maintenance is one more reminder that comfort was not a permanent state but a daily project. Every night's little sanctuary had to be rebuilt from the remains of the last. And if the bed is not in a great solar or richly appointed chamber, if it belongs to a lesser night or a guest lodged where space allowed, the curtains may be simpler, but the logic remains unchanged. Rough wool can still block a draft. Plain linen can still soften sound. A narrow enclosure can still do holy work if the room beyond it is cold enough. Medieval sleep was often democratic, only in its inventiveness. People used what they had, but they kept using the same instincts. Enclose. Layer. Tuck. Warm first. Rest second. The castle teaches quickly that privacy is expensive, but warmth is more expensive still. So even once your bed is curtained and your room prepared, another truth remains waiting in the dark. Medieval sleep was often shared. Not romantically, not scandalously in the way modern imaginations sometimes rush to misread it, but practically, economically, and bodily. A second person under the blanket changed everything. Breath doubled. Heat gathered faster. Cold edges softened. Even awkwardness became easier to forgive once the room itself turned hard enough. The source material handles this with exactly the right plainness. Bedding was costly. Mattresses, Covers, pelts, curtains, all of it represented labor, cloth, animal skin, transport, and storage. To put multiple people in one bed or one curtained space was not always a sign of intimacy. Often it was logistics. Sometimes strategy. Sometimes custom. Sometimes all three at once. A squire at the foot of the bed. Two retainers shoulder to shoulder. Brothers, companions, pages, fellow travelers. The body heat of one human being is useful. The body heat of several becomes climate control by medieval standards. If you imagine it now, the difference is immediate. Alone under the covers, your own body must slowly warm the enclosed air. With another sleeper beside you, the process quickens. The fabric between bodies warms first. Then the shared pocket of air. Then the blanket seems heavier in a good way because it has more warmth to hold. The cold still presses from the room, but it presses against a larger gathered resistance. I have always found this one of the most revealing details in domestic history. No matter how proud the social world may be by daylight, winter nights reduce life to old animal arithmetic. More bodies, more warmth. That is not romance. That is mammal wisdom. Of course, it could be inconvenient. Someone takes too much blanket. Someone snores. Someone's foot is cold enough to start a private war under the covers. Someone shifts too much. Someone insists on the center position because it is warmer and pretends not to notice how quickly the edge chills. There are entire little comedies hidden inside the history of shared sleep. You can almost hear the muttered complaints. Move over. Stop stealing the pelt. Your elbow again. Your boots smell like the stable. Yet beneath the grumbling lies the very simple fact that people kept doing it because it worked. The source mentions a bed large enough for 4, which sounds extravagant until you remember the logic of winter. A great bed could be a piece of architecture, a small communal shelter inside the larger room. One cover, one curtain, one gathered store of heat. In that sense, the bed becomes less like furniture and more like a camp inside the fortress. A micro-household of breathing sleepers, each inconvenient and each useful. This is one place where history becomes unexpectedly tender. A hardened night, all daylight severity, half asleep beside a squire whose breath fogs faintly in the enclosed air. Men trained for war turning by instinct toward warmth. The sounds of sleep mingling. Snore, sigh, shift of blankets. It is not polished or grand. It is ordinary life refusing to freeze. And ordinary life had many sounds in a castle at night. Once you begin listening, truly listening, the fortress becomes a strange instrument. Stone amplifies some noises and buries others. Footsteps on a stair can sound near when they are far. A cough in the corridor travels like a message. A beam settling in the roof can become, to a tired imagination, the step of something unseen. The source is wise to linger here, because how people slept depended not only on temperature, but on what accompanied them through the dark. Tonight, in this chamber, after the servants have gone and the curtains are drawn, you still hear the world beyond your little cocoon. A guard's tread on the wall walk outside. The faint bark of a dog below. Wind pressing at the shutter, then easing. a horse thumping one hoof in the stable, the low complaint of timber responding to cold. Every sound lands more clearly because the room is otherwise so still. Modern people often imagine silence as peaceful. Castle silence was not always peaceful. It was charged. In a world without engines, electric hum, or sealed windows, each isolated sound carried more meaning. It could be nothing. It could be weather. It could be a servant. It could be a signal of danger. So sleepers learned a difficult art, not eliminating sound, because they could not, absorbing it, letting it become the background over which sleep could slowly lay its hand. Some men probably slept like stones once fatigue claimed them. Others, no doubt, woke at every creak. Letters and complaints from the period suggest both kinds existed, and perhaps the same person could be either, depending on the day, the season, the amount of wine, the memory of a recent campaign, the cough in his chest, or the rumor of trouble beyond the walls. Sleep is always personal, even when the bed is shared. The wind deserves its own mention. In castles, it did not merely blow. It found the architecture's intentions and played them like pipes. Arrow slits moaned. Gaps around shutters whistled. Door curtains breathed inward and outward with each stronger gust. In the half-sleep of night, such sounds could begin to resemble voices, and medieval people were not immune to that transformation. Servants told stories. Ghost tales moved through the household. A breath in the corridor became a spirit. A groan in the beam became a warning. The boundary between house noise and haunting grows thin when you are already cold. That is where prayer enters the room, softly and naturally, as it should. Before sleep, many medieval people prayed. Not always with dramatic fervor, not always with perfect attention, but with habit, hope, and fear all mingled. The source mentions Compline and evening prayer, and that rhythm belongs here in the dark. You kneel if you can bear the chill of the floor through the rushes, or perhaps you pray already under the covers, fingers clasped near the chin because the room is too cold for display. The words need not be elaborate. Keep us through the night. Guard this household. Spare us illness. Let the fire hold. Let the child in the next room rest. Let no enemy come. Let the dark pass quietly. I have always thought bedtime prayer in hard places makes perfect emotional sense. It is not only theology. It is the mind asking for somewhere to set down its vigilance. You cannot remain on watch inwardly all night and still sleep. Prayer gives the body permission to hand a little of the burden elsewhere, if only for a few hours. Objects help too. A crucifix by the bed, a saint's relic tucked in a pouch, a blessed token under the pillow. The line between devotion and protection blurs, but perhaps that does not matter. Human beings have always liked sleeping near a sign that someone stronger than the weather might be paying attention. The room remains cold. The wind remains itself. But the heart loosens a little when ritual has been observed. There is humor even here. I can very easily imagine a man beginning his evening prayer with excellent solemnity, only to fall asleep halfway through and wake later, unsure whether he had completed the psalm or only dreamed he had. Medieval piety, like modern piety, had to coexist with exhaustion. And then the bells. The source handles them beautifully because bells do more than mark time. They organize the darkness. A bell tolling from the chapel or the village beyond the walls reminds every half-sleeping person that the night has structure. Midnight has come. A later hour has come. Dawn is still not here, but time has not broken. In a world without glowing clocks beside the bed, this mattered profoundly. The bell's sound traveling through frozen air could reassure or irritate, depending on the sleeper, but it always located the body inside a larger order. Imagine the bell now, deep, slow, carrying over the moat and the outer yard and through the shutter crack into your curtained bed. One note, then space, then another. The body hears it almost before the mind does. A shared sound over shared darkness. Somewhere a monk is awake. Somewhere a watchman shifts his grip on a spear. Somewhere someone else is also listening from under a blanket. That knowledge can be calming. The same sound might also wake the lightly sleeping night, who then curses softly, tugs the cover higher, and rolls toward the warmer center of the bed. Human reactions were always varied. That is another reason I like this material so much. The same bell can be sacred order, rude interruption, or lullaby, depending on who is hearing it. Alongside prayer and bells sits another quieter layer of medieval thought, the fear of night air itself. Drafts were not merely cold. Many believed they carried illness, foul vapors, dangerous humors. Curtains, herbs, closed shutters, all of these protected not only against temperature, but against whatever invisible harm the dark might convey. A modern listener may smile, but in damp chambers where coughs spread easily and winter sickness lingered, such beliefs did not feel foolish. They felt observational. Something entered with bad air. People became ill. Therefore, one guarded against the air. So cloth was tucked into cracks. Herbs were burned or strewn. Garlic or onion might sit in a room and assault everyone's dignity in the name of health. Lavender sweetened a pillow while also claiming to purify. Rosemary hung near the bed because scent itself seemed defensive. Medieval sleepers did not divide comfort, medicine, and ritual as neatly as we like to. They layered those too. You lie here now, under blanket and pelt, perhaps with another warm body nearby, perhaps alone but hearing others through the walls, and the whole chamber feels held together by these overlapping attempts at peace. Fabric against draught, prayer against fear, shared heat against cold, bells against the shapelessness of night, herbs against unseen harm. None of it is total. None of it solves the problem absolutely. But together, it makes sleep possible. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of this part of the story. Medieval people did not conquer the night. They negotiated with it through company and rhythm, through repeated sounds that ceased to frighten because they became familiar, through the breathing of another sleeper under the same cover, through words spoken toward heaven, through bells heard from far away, through accepting that perfect silence and perfect comfort were fantasies unsuited to castle life. Listen now to the chamber once more. The person beside you turns and the mattress murmurs. Outside the curtain, a floorboard gives a small complaint. Wind brushes the shutter and moves on. Somewhere lower in the building, dogs begin, then stop. A bell has already faded. The fire is quieter than before, and yet inside the bed the warmth is steadier now, more collective, more real. This is not the end of the night's story. Dawn and duty still wait. So do rank and illness and the larger truths of how different people within the same walls experienced the same winter. But before all that, there is this deeper settling. The body finally begins to trust that, for an hour or two at least, the little world inside the curtain will hold. The cold remains beyond it, patient as ever. But patient things can sometimes be outlasted when there is wool over linen, pilt over blanket, prayer in the mind, a bell in the distance, and another human being near enough that your shared breathing becomes one more defense against the dark. There is also the matter of what shared sleep did to fear. Alone in a castle room, every creak can become a threat. Beside another person, even one who snores like a saw through oak, the mind interprets the room differently. A sudden sound is no longer faced by one imagination only. It enters a shared human space. Someone else heard that too, or slept through it, which may be even more reassuring. Another sleeper becomes evidence that the world has not ended simply because the shutter knocked once in the wind. That may be why crowded rooms, for all their discomfort, could feel safer than solitary ones. Pages and squires in communal quarters heard every cough, whisper, and muttered joke. They also heard each other's breathing continue through the hours. There is deep comfort in that rhythm. The body has known it since infancy. It says, "You're not the only warm thing in the dark." And bells, too, had this shared quality. Their sound belonged to no single chamber. They crossed walls, rank, and beds. The Lord heard them. The servant heard them. The guard on the wall heard them hardest of all. For a few moments, the entire fortress occupied the same note. I think that is one reason bells remain so emotionally powerful in these stories. They are collective sound in a world of divided comfort. The same iron tongue marking the hours for everyone from feather bed to straw pallet. Even the fear of bad air had a social side. Curtains were tucked in by one person for another. Herbs were chosen, burned, or strewn by someone who hoped they might help another breathe a little easier. A room that smelled of rosemary or sage was often a room shaped by care, whether affectionate, dutiful, or simply habitual. In hard winters, habit itself becomes a form of love. So as you lie here now, hearing all these small sounds and letting them pass through you instead of against you, the castle begins to feel less hostile than it did at first. Not warm exactly. Never truly warm. But inhabited. And inhabited places are easier to sleep in, even when the wind keeps speaking through the stone. The night inside the bed has become more intimate now, but the castle itself has not stopped breathing around you. In fact, once your own body is finally warm enough to stop protesting, you begin to notice the larger body of the fortress more clearly. It does not sleep as one thing. It sleeps in layers, just as you do. Lords above, servants below, guards awake, children half dreaming, horses shifting in their stalls, dogs breathing near a dying fire. Somewhere, in one room, A woman turns to listen for the small sound of a child. Somewhere else, a page curls deeper into straw and tries not to think about morning. The same winter wraps them all, but not with equal kindness. That is one of the hardest truths carried quietly through the source. Not every bed in the castle was the same. Not every room. Not every pillow. Not every right to warmth. The cold entered every chamber. Yes, it touched noble and servant alike, but what stood between that cold and the body could differ enormously. A lord might lie in a solar with tapestries on the wall, curtains round the bed, feather mattress beneath him, pelts above him, herbs in the pillow, and a servant who had checked the coals twice already. A stable boy, a scullion, a young squire too low in rank to matter much, might lie on straw with one blanket, one cloak, and another boy pressed shoulder to shoulder for warmth. The same roof, the same weather, completely different night. If you were standing with me now and looking at the castle from above, roof gone, walls cut open like a dollhouse of stone, you would see winter arranged by status. High chambers, lower rooms, corners of halls, narrow pallets tucked near kitchens, rough bunks set along walls, dogs under benches, perhaps a maid, asleep upright in a chair, because a lady of the household may call in the night. It would be impossible not to notice how sleep itself had hierarchy built into it. Feather beds appear in wills because they mattered. Curtains appear in inventories because they mattered. Fur covers, embroidered pillows, carved bed frames, fire screens, tapestries, all mattered. They were not only signs of prestige, they were buffers between flesh and hardship. A noble inheritance was often partly an inheritance of better sleep. That feels almost painfully honest to say aloud, but it is true. Comfort is never symbolic only. It settles directly into the bones. Yet even privilege did not abolish discomfort. That remains one of the most appealingly human aspects of this whole topic. A night in a well-furnished chamber might still wake with a frozen nose. A lady beneath rich covers might still hear the draught whispering at the edge of the curtain. A child tucked under embroidered wool might still cough in the night glade. The difference was not between suffering and not suffering. It was between degrees of mercy and illness. We must let illness enter now, because on the coldest nights it waited just beyond comfort, or sometimes within it. The source rightly lets a cough interrupt the room. One cough in a castle corridor could change the feeling of the whole night. Cold and damp were not merely unpleasant. Medieval people believed they invited sickness, and whether their theories about humors and bad air were correct in detail or not, they were not wrong to fear winter chambers. Smoke-irritated lungs, crowded rooms past fevers, whetstone and poor ventilation made breathing harder for the already weak. A cough after dark was not background noise. It was a question mark. Imagine it now. You have almost drifted off. Blanket warm against your chin. Another sleeper breathing nearby perhaps. And then through the corridor comes that rough, hollow sound. One cough. Then another. Not dramatic, not theatrical, simply human and worrying. The body hears it before the mind decides what it means. You pull the covers a little higher. Your own throat feels suspiciously dry for a moment. You inhale the rosemary from the pillow or the smoke near the fire and hope they count for something. Medieval people layered against sickness much as they layered against cold. Herbs in pillows. Warm spiced drink before bed. Onions. Garlic. Little charms. Relics. Prayers. Closed curtains. Blocked cracks. A determination to keep the night air from touching the chest too directly. It is easy to smile at some of those remedies, and yet there is tenderness in them. People do not need perfect medicine before they begin caring for each other. They needed hope, ritual, and something to do with frightened hands. A knight who feared battle little might still fear the slow weakness of a winter sickness. Steel had shape. A fever did not. A cough might become tomorrow's inconvenience, or the beginning of a long decline. Many households knew this too well. Cold season turned domestic rooms into places of vigilance. Someone listening for another's breathing. Someone carrying broth. Someone adding another blanket. Someone deciding the bed must be moved farther from the outer wall. This was care in a world with limited tools, and perhaps that is why it feels so moving. It was rarely enough, but it was sincere. The women of the household lived this differently, and the source is wise to widen toward them before the end. Castle sleep was shaped by gender as well as rank. A lady might have a chamber richer in fabric, softer in scent, more enclosed in custom, and still sleep less soundly than the night nearby. Children close at hand, servants in attendance, obligations that crossed even into the night. If a baby stirred, she stirred. If a child coughed, she listened. If a maid dropped into sleep too deeply, someone would notice at dawn, but not before. The same cold. A different burden. I like the image from the source of a lapdog's cushion being warmed, partly because it is absurd, and partly because it is true to human nature. In hard seasons, people lavish care where they can, because care itself is a reassurance. A dog warmed. A child tucked tighter. A husband fussed at for stealing blankets. Domestic life keeps finding its small comedies, even in stone rooms where frost touches the shutters. And those parallel chambers matter. In one room, a lord turning on a feather mattress and muttering at the bell. In another, a woman breathing carefully so as not to wake the child. Below, a servant asleep on straw so tired that no draught can fully wake him. Further off, squires in a communal room, feet tangled in blankets, whispering just a little too late into the night, because youth can turn even discomfort into fellowship. The castle becomes a hive of unequal sleeping, equal winter, and shared dependence on dawn. This is where memory begins to enter more strongly as well. The source uses crusade memories and warmer lands as a kind of dream counterpoint to the frozen chamber, and that is exactly the right instinct. Cold invites the mind to travel elsewhere. A man who has once known desert heat may remember it most vividly when frost forms on the inside of his window. A body wrapped in fur may dream of loose sand and sunburned stone. Sleep does that. It takes the thing most absent and offers it back in altered form. Imagine the knight in his curtained bed, almost warm enough at last, and the mind drifting not deeper into the room but away from it. away from the moat and the tower and the watch bell, toward a memory of sunlight so bright it hurt the eyes, toward dry air instead of damp cold, toward dust instead of frost. Perhaps he remembers the Levant, if he has been there. Perhaps he only remembers a summer campaign in France, or a hunt in early autumn, or even childhood fields under August light. The exact memory matters less than the contrast. Cold makes warmth feel holy in recollection. The body may still be in the castle. The dream walks elsewhere. There is a sadness to that too. Returned crusaders, or any men who had known the wider world, carried more than scars or stories. They carried climates inside them. A northern chamber could never quite contain that. One can imagine waking with sweat at the neck from a dream of heat, only to have the winter room take that sweat and turn it chill within seconds. Sleep itself becomes a place of dislocation, half memory, half present weather. And then, because no castle was ever truly still, animals begin to return to the edge of awareness. The source is generous with them, and it should be, because a medieval fortress at night was as full of breathing creatures as of human ones. Horses below in their stalls, dogs by the hearth, falcons perhaps in some noble chamber, mice in the walls whether invited or not, even pigs or chickens not far from domestic spaces in some households. To sleep in a castle was not to sleep apart from animals. It was to lie inside a whole enclosed winter ecosystem. Listen now. A horse stamps once, heavy and final. A dog lets out one sleepy bark, and then nothing. Somewhere a chain clinks. Perhaps a falcon rustles on its perch in the room of a lord eccentric enough to keep it close. These are not disruptions only. They are part of the reassurance too. The castle is alive. The warmth of beasts in lower rooms may even help the stone a little, though the smell is another matter. Medieval comfort was rarely free of odor. You took your warmth where you found it and forgave the stable note in the air. I have always thought that one of the most charming truths about this world is how often humans and animals slept in practical companionship. Hounds at the foot of the bed, horses below the chamber, cats prowling where grain was stored, a lapdog under a lady's coverlet. None of it would surprise the people living there. To them, it was simply part of shelter, part of life within walls. Modern neatness came much later, and has perhaps made us forget how ordinary it once was to sleep among other species and borrow their warmth, their warning sounds, even their calm. The guards, meanwhile, are still awake. That too must be remembered before we end. Sleep in a castle was collective not only because warmth was shared, but because wakefulness was shared unequally. Some slept because others did not. On the wall walk, a guard shifts his spear from one hand to the other. In the courtyard, another stamps his boots and resents the moon. A fire watcher checks the embers. A servant half wakes to listen whether a child will cry again. The fortress keeps its little watchful organs active even while much of it lies still. That is why the sleepers can surrender as far as they do. There is something almost sacred in that exchange. One person remains cold, so another may be less afraid. The bell returns too, perhaps faintly now, or perhaps only as memory in the body. Those deep notes organize the night, but they also marked that the difficult hours are passing whether one feels them passing or not. First, sleep, waking, a prayer perhaps, another stretch of sleep. That old segmented rhythm some historians argue for makes emotional sense in such a world. How could sleep be one smooth river in a fortress full of bells, births, sickness, patrols, and winter wind? More likely, it came in pools. Rest gathered, broke, gathered again. Enough, not perfect. That phrase keeps returning because it feels true. By now you are warm enough not to fight every thought. The castle beyond the bed has become larger in imagination, but gentler. You can sense the hierarchy, the coughs, the children, the dogs, the memory of heat, the watchman's step, and still remain at peace because your own little pocket inside it has held. That is what matters most tonight. Not that the whole fortress has become kind, only that you have found a small zone within it where the body has stopped pleading and begun trusting. And yet the story cannot end here, because dawn is already beginning its long hidden approach. The embers will pale. Frost will show itself. Curtains will open. Every room will reveal the truth of how well or how badly the night was endured. Morning in a medieval castle is not a simple, cheerful rising. It is a reckoning. Frost on the inside of shutters, stiffness in the joints, breath visible again as blankets are thrown back. Servants moving through rooms to wake those who would rather bargain for another hour. The coldest nights were survived. Yes, but survival only becomes real when the first light shows you that you have made it through. So let yourself drift a little further. The body beside you, if there is one, grows less distinct and more like warmth itself. The dog has settled. The horse below has quieted. A child in some other room has stopped crying. The cough in the corridor does not come again, at least not for a while. The whole castle feels as if it is floating between the deepest hours and the earliest hint of morning. That fragile, suspended time, when even hard places seem almost tender. That tenderness matters. It is not softness exactly. Medieval castle life was not soft, but it had moments when all the efforts, curtains, herbs, blankets, prayers, watchmen, coals, shared warmth, rank and labor and inconvenience, came together into something close to grace. A household surviving winter together, unequally, imperfectly, sometimes resentfully, but together all the same. And perhaps that is why these rooms still feel strangely moving centuries later. They remind us that sleep has always been more social than we like to admit, more dependent, more improvised, more vulnerable. Even a knight needed others to carry him gently into morning. Morning begins before the light admits it. That is the first thing you notice. The castle changes in feeling before it changes in brightness. The bell that seemed far away in the deepest night begins to sound closer, or perhaps your body is simply nearer to waking. The embers in the hearth are no longer fiery but thoughtful, a red memory under ash. Somewhere in the corridor, a board sounds under a servant's foot. Somewhere below, a bucket scrapes stone. The watch is changing or ending. The animals know it too. A horse stamps, and then there is the soft shuffle of hay. A dog gives one warning bark, and then remembers this is only the household returning to itself. Inside the bed, the warmth has thinned, but not vanished. That is the strange little triumph of the night. You are not cozy in the modern sense. No one in this story has truly been cozy, however much they may have chased it. But you are alive, and more than alive, you are rested enough to belong to the day again. Under the curtains there is still a pocket of your own breath, your own heat, the lingering scent of wool, fur, smoke, and herbs. Outside the curtains, winter waits patiently, but it has been held off long enough for dawn to matter. And dawn does matter, because it reveals everything. A medieval castle in morning winter light is almost ruthless in its honesty. The room that felt hushed and private in darkness suddenly shows its edges. The shutter line furred with frost. The little patch on the wall where damp has darkened the stone. The chair where clothing waits, stiff and cool. The cup by the bedside with a skin of chill over the drink if no one moved it closer to warmth in the night. Your first visible breath of morning reminds you that whatever comfort the bed managed to create was always provisional. The room itself is still a cold room. The night did not defeat it. It merely found a way through it. If you draw the curtains aside now, and let us do it gently, there is that moment of immediate loss. Warmth slips. The larger air enters. The skin of your face wakes all at once. Somewhere in the castle, the same thing is happening in dozens of rooms. Lords blinking at the pale light. Ladies listening for children or bells or servants. Pages already being shaken awake. Guards finally stepping in from the wall. Grooms in the stable rubbing their hands hard and breathing into them before beginning the day's work. The castle is a machine of cold bodies resuming motion. This, I think, is where the source becomes quietly profound. Sleep in a medieval castle was never only about the night. It was about making the body usable again by dawn. A knight who had not slept, who had shivered all night, who woke with stiff joints, a sore throat, frozen fingers, would carry that loss into his training, his judgment, his ride, his hunt, his patrol, his battle. Rest was part of military readiness, part of governance, part of domestic survival. Bedding listed beside weapons in household records makes perfect sense when you see it like this. A good blanket could serve the next day almost as surely as a good blade. There is an irony there I love. Great houses displayed their strength, not only in stone walls and armored men, but in whether those men could get enough sleep to remain competent. The spectacle of power relied, in secret, on warm enough feet. And yet the castle morning also reveals inequality with a cruelty night partly disguised. The noble chamber opens to a servant already approaching with more wood, or warmed drink, or fresh rushes, or news. A lower room opens to none of these things. A squire or servant may wake on straw, half numb, cloak damp at the hem, and simply have to stand up into the day because there is no further comfort to negotiate. Someone at the top is handed warmth. Someone lower down must make it or do without. The same dawn sharpens these differences as much as the same night did. I do not say that to sour the calm, only to keep the truth present. Medieval sleep was communal triumph. Yes, but also communal hierarchy. Some people were buffered from winter by the labor of others. Some were the buffer. Both facts belong in the room. The source also gestures toward small rituals of surviving the coldest nights, and I find those deeply moving. Extra bread or ale for those who kept the fires well. Morning gratitude after bitter weather. Songs or jokes among retainers who are simply relieved no one froze. No fire got loose. No sickness worsened in the dark. Human beings will always invent ceremony around survival, if survival remains uncertain enough. It is one of our tenderest habits. Picture the castle now just after first light. Not full sun, not brightness, only that thin, gray winter illumination that seems to rise from the snow or the stone before the sky fully commits to day. The frozen moat outside catches it first, a pale metallic glow under the walls. Frost at the shutter edge becomes visible like white stitching. The bell's echo feels less dreamlike. Servants move quicker. Someone opens a door, and the air rushes with a sharper smell from outdoors. The whole place is pulling itself upright, and all around you the traces of the night remain. The depression in the mattress. A dog hair on the blanket if one shared your bed's warmth in some lower or grander chamber. Soot scent in the curtain. The fur pelt heavier at the edges where your hands clutched it in sleep. Perhaps the second dent in the bed where another body lay. Perhaps a little damp patch near the pillow where breath gathered under the curtain. These are the marks of a night actually lived in, not a romantic painting of one. I have always thought that real history hides best in those little residues. Not the grand tapestry on the wall, though that matters too. The compressed straw, the drift of ash, the twisted blanket edge, the moved stool, the warming pan leaned cold against the hearth after its work is done. The things that say, someone was here, and they were trying to stay alive and sleep. Now, let the room widen, one last time. Beyond your chamber, the great hall below may still smell of last night's smoke and feast. Benches askew. A dog under the table. Somewhere, a minstrel, perhaps still asleep later than he intended, after too much song and too much ale. In another part of the castle, women are already beginning duties the night only interrupted, not erased. In the stable, the horses are steam and hide and hay scent. In the chapel, someone is already praying while someone else is still struggling to wake. In the servant quarters, there is no luxury of slow rising at all. The whole fortress is reassembling itself around the day, and day will not care whether the night was kind. That, perhaps, is the final lesson hidden in all this cold domestic detail. Medieval sleepers did not seek perfect comfort because perfect comfort was not available. They sought enough warmth to close the eyes, enough security to stop listening for every noise, enough health left in the chest to breathe deeply, enough rest to stand when called, enough shelter that the soul did not feel abandoned to winter. Enough. Always enough. That word belongs to this whole subject more than luxury ever could. The source ends by softening the story into reflection. And that is exactly right. Because once you have walked through the layers, straw, feathers, pelts, fire, brazier, curtains, in servants, shared bodies, bells, sickness, memory, animals, hierarchy, you begin to understand that sleep in a castle was not one thing. It was an arrangement of compromises, a fragile agreement between architecture and weather, wealth and hardship, ritual and biology, fear and fatigue. The night slept because dozens of little defenses held for long enough. The servant slept because exhaustion overpowered discomfort for a few precious hours. The household as a whole slept because some remained awake and because everyone understood, however imperfectly, what winter demanded. If you were here beside me by the fire, I would probably ask you to imagine one last scene. A chamber after dawn. Curtains half open. The bed still warm in its middle and cold at the edges. Frost paling on the inner shutter. A pair of boots waiting. A sword at rest. A pelt folded back. Breath in the air. The body inside the bed, reluctant to leave its little den, because outside it lies the whole drafty, noisy, beautiful burden of a medieval day. In that hesitation, in that pause before standing, lies the whole truth of the story. These nights were not comfortable in the way we mean comfort now, but they were lived, managed, softened, and survived. There is humor in that too. Thank heaven. Somewhere, a knight wakes with his cap crooked, one sock gone, blanket stolen by a squire or spouse, or simply wrapped around himself in the night like a greedy serpent. Somewhere a lord boasting of his warm solar still touches the floor and yelps at the cold. Somewhere a dog refuses to leave the bed. Somewhere a servant who slept terribly is already shaking out, rushes in another room for someone of higher rank to claim the morning was not so bad after all. History should let us laugh at these things. Laughter is one more form of warmth. And what of the greatest image the source leaves us with? That to sleep in a medieval castle was victory enough. I think that is true. Not a grand victory, not the sort sung by minstrels in halls, but one of the private victories on which all the louder ones depend. To sleep was to preserve judgment, strength, patience, and spirit. To wake warm enough to move was to win a battle. Winter fought every night. No banner for it. No herald. No trumpet. Only another morning. And perhaps that is reward enough. The castle itself seems almost gentler when thought of this way. Not because it was gentle. It was not. But because generation after generation filled its harshness with repeated acts of care. Curtains tied. Fires watched. Coals carried. Beds warmed. Children tucked in. Herbs strewn. Dogs admitted. Bells heard. Prayers whispered. These are small acts, domestic acts, often invisible in grand histories, and yet they are what turn a fortress from a machine of defense into a place where human beings can remain human through winter. That is what I want to leave with you most. Not the romance of nights, though there is some charm in them. Not the glamour of castles, though moonlight on stone can still stir the heart. But the ingenuity of ordinary survival. The way people built islands of rest in rooms never meant for comfort. The way they borrowed from animal fur, monastic bells, servant labor, herbal scent, human closeness, and simple stubbornness until the night became bearable. They did not conquer the coldest nights. They coaxed a few hours of peace out of them. And perhaps, If we are being honest, that is what good sleep still is. A negotiation, a layering, a soft refusal to let the world intrude any farther than it must. We simply do it with easier tools now. So let the castle recede. Let the frozen moat blur into pale light. Let the watchman on the wall finally hand his duty to morning. Let the dog settle. Let the horse stamp once and then stand still. Let the shutters hold. Let the herbs in the pillow fade into memory. Let the pelt become only weight, then warmth, then nothing at all. Let the bell's echo flatten into silence. Let the whole stone fortress dissolve into the one quiet fact that you made it through the night. You can feel your own breathing now, more than the draft, your own warmth more than the room. The lesson hidden in those medieval chambers has become simple. Comfort was never guaranteed, but it was made. Not complete, but enough. Not effortless, but real. And if a knight, a squire, a servant, a lady, a child, a guard, and even the dogs and horses could all find some version of rest inside those walls, then perhaps you can let your own body believe, just for tonight, in the old wisdom of layers, patience, and surrender. The fire is low. The curtains are drawn. The castle is still. The story has carried you through frost on the walls, wool on the skin, straw beneath the back, feathers beneath the fortunate, fur on the blanket, smoke in the air, bells in the dark, coughs in the corridor, and the soft collective labor of a household holding winter back 1 hour at a time. Now there is nothing left to do but rest inside the warmth that has been gathered for you. Good night.